to supporters. Can we take a listen?
Two people. So sad. You know, it's sad, it's rude, too. And you know part of the problem? We have 10,000, 12,000 people here. Those two people will have a little line that, oh, there were pickets. They're not pickets. Yeah, you can get them the hell out. Go ahead, get out.
That was Donald Trump addressing a protester, apparently, at a rally. We are back with Jay, Clarence, and Mindy. Shell-shocked by Donald Trump's unexpectedly long shelf life as a presidential candidate, the Republican establishment finally appears to be playing proverbial hardball with the GOP frontrunner. A super PAC supporting Ohio Governor John Kasich released this web ad against Trump earlier today.
I have a great relationship with the blacks. I've always had a great relationship with the blacks.
The blacks.
Well, I just don't respect her as a journalist. You know, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever.
Somebody's doing the raping, Don. I mean, you know, somebody's doing it. Just take it's women being raped. Well, who's doing the raping?
The belt moves this way. It moves this way. How stupid are the people of Iowa?
The Wall Street Journal reported on Friday that a group called Trump Card LLC is uniting donors and preparing to launch a guerrilla campaign against the real estate billionaire. A memo reviewed by the Wall Street Journal reports one possible ad would link Mr. Trump's views and style to his celebrity foe, Rosie O'Donnell, in hopes of provoking a reaction from Mr. Trump, according to the memo. Other possible tactics include using a Trump impersonator to show him insulting people and attacking his business record in stark, nasty terms. The goal, according to the memo, isn't to convert Mr. Trump's supporters into backing other candidates, but to dissuade them from voting altogether. So is there still time to bring him down, or does the Donald hold the proverbial Trump card? Clarence, Rosie O'Donnell, and Trump impersonators, can they bring this man down?
Well, we have certainly seen Donald Trump defy all of our expectations. The punditocracy, all of our predictions saying, well, that John McCain remark, that'll kill him, you know, all the way down the line. Nothing kills him. He's like Godzilla. He just gets stronger the more he gets attacked. And so I'm questioning whether or not even this new attack from fellow Republicans is going to make a difference. We're dealing with a different kind of candidate, a different kind of constituency here. A lot of these folks who are following Trump so closely are folks who haven't voted that much before because they've been too cynical about the whole process. And this is something that will make a difference. Those voters in Ohio didn't show up for Mitt Romney in 2012, and that made the difference for Barack Obama's victory. So if they do show up for Donald Trump, we may be further surprised as these primaries go along.
Mindy, I wonder if this doesn't have the opposite of effect, which is the narrative of the GOP establishment banding together to kick Trump out of the race. Doesn't that just further impassion Donald Trump supporters?
Well, it's possible. I mean, I think a lot of people underestimated that Donald Trump is actually quite a talented politician. You know, at the beginning, people said, oh, he's a celebrity and he knows how to get attention. He's actually quite a talented politician. He's a smart man that knows exactly what he's doing. So I think it's really challenging. That's what's been challenging the establishment in figuring out how to bring him down. I mean, ultimately, you have to remember, though, I mean, even this effort, there's not, we talk about the Republican establishment. You know, what you're talking about is one PAC, one campaign's PAC, or an outside PAC. There isn't a unified effort at this point where kind of all the, you know, typical traditional donors and all the political organizations that are part of the party are focused on taking him down. So I think it's really important to remember that. It's also important to remember, though, for those who, you know, don't want to see Trump nominated, which is a lot of political insiders, is that while he has a lot of support right now, he does seem to have a ceiling. And winning over a third of Republicans nationally is not enough if you can't go beyond that in these primaries. So whether this effort takes him down or not, there still is a path where, you know, just by the nature of the race and the fact that he does have this hard ceiling, he'll take himself out.
Jay, Donald Trump has not been shy about suggesting that he might run as an independent. And I guess I wonder, does this rhetoric further inflame an already pretty volatile temper as far as that's concerned?
Certainly, I think his goal here, I've never been convinced that his goal here is to be president. I think actually his goal is to get what he's getting, which is a lot of attention, a lot of fame. And if that's your goal, would you really want one speaking slot at the Republican nomination or the Republican convention versus 3 primetime speaking slots on the stage and 3 presidential debates? That's always seemed more appealing to me. If I were him, you get so much more attention, it lasts so much longer. But we'll see what happens. It's certainly entertaining no matter which way he goes. If he becomes the nominee, even more so.
One of the things I insisted on the day I walked into the Oval Office was that I don't want intelligence shaded by politics. I don't want it shaded by the desire to tell a feel-good story. We can't make good policy unless we've got good, accurate, hard-headed, clear-eyed intelligence.
Welcome back to Hardball. President Obama says he wants to get to the bottom of reports that U.S. military officials may have altered intelligence reports on ISIS after the New York Times revealed that the Defense Department's Inspector General is widening a probe into that matter. There is special concern that analysts at U.S. Central Command were ordered to make it seem like U.S. airstrikes against ISIS were more effective than they were in reality. Congress is also investigating the matter. Joining me now from Washington is New York Times national security reporter Michael Schmidt, who co-authored that story. Michael, scoop upon scoop, my friend. Let's talk first about what the practical effect of these altered reports may have been. The White House is greatly pushing back on the notion that this intelligence informed the president's decision-making.
Dozens of analysts have come forward down at CENTCOM, Central Command, which oversees our military operations in Iraq and in Syria, and have said, look, we were providing assessments that weren't making it into the final product, and our assessments were not as rosy as the intelligence that was rising up and going to policymakers in Washington.
Okay, so there's the interpretation and the analysis of those reports, but there is also this. Congress is investigating, and some of the DoD's documents on the rise of ISIS capabilities are missing. And you write that military officials are telling Congress that, quote, some of those emails and documents may have been deleted before they had to be turned over to investigators. And if anything, that seems like perhaps the most suspect ingredient in all of this.
So this is what's going on. The Inspector General for DOD, for the Pentagon, is doing this investigation, and they're trying to get their hands on every document they can, all the emails from the analysts and the documents they were producing and what they ultimately turned out to be, what the intelligence was that was going up to Washington. And what they're trying to see is what changed. And in the process of that, some folks have told us that there are emails from people that were making changes that have disappeared. Now, if that is true, that is a very big deal, because you're basically destroying evidence in an investigation, and all of a sudden something that turned out to be initially something about intelligence will likely become criminal.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about how Congress is handling this, because at present this is mostly driven by Republicans in Congress. Is that right?
That's right. The Republicans, look, they look for everything they can on Obama, and they haven't been terribly successful in the scandal area, but they see this perhaps as another chance. They think this may go all the way to the top. This was a White House that wanted to see special intel reports. That's what they're saying, you know, that backed up their foreign policy decisions and their view of the world. And look, we haven't seen any evidence of that yet, but that's, I think, where this is going on the Republican side. Let's
talk a little bit about the Inspector General, Michael. When do we expect the results of his or her report?
I don't think it'll be any time soon, because on top of looking at all the changes, what the Inspector General has to do is look at what the intel was at the time. So what was the CIA saying, and how does that differ from what CENTCOM was saying? And were there significant differences? And is there a pattern here? And these documents are classified, which means they're harder to handle. And do some of them have to be declassified if there's going to be a report that's made public? So I don't anticipate getting an answer on this anytime soon.
Well, and then there's the practical matter of hindsight being 2020, right? Now that ISIS is more of a threat, it seems more sort of willfully ignorant to ignore perhaps signals that maybe everybody would have ignored at one point, right?
Well, look, it's certainly clear that the administration seemed like they were caught off guard in the summer of 2014 when there was the beheadings, and all of a sudden we found ourselves back on a war footing in Iraq and Syria. And because of that, there's a lot of questions. Was the administration ignoring things? What type of intelligence were they getting? Why didn't they anticipate that ISIS was going to be as powerful as it was? So there have been a lot of questions there, and Republicans have long wondered, why hasn't the president had more accurate assessments of what's going on? They point to his comments just the other day where he said that ISIS was contained, and then there was the attack in France. So that's sort of the backdrop that we're looking at.
Thank you to the New York Times' Michael Schmidt.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back to Hardball. That was President Obama yesterday on the alarmist and bellicose rhetoric we've been hearing from Republicans in the aftermath of the Paris tragedy. Since Friday, the Republican candidates for president have taken a hawkish stand, especially when it comes to the Syrian refugee issue. They're even hawkish on that one. Yesterday, Dr. Ben Carson used an analogy likening to dogs with rabies. That's what he's calling these people, dogs with rabies. Let's listen.
You know, if there's a rabid dog running around your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog, and you're probably going to put your children out of the way.
Well, speaking about the refugees on Fox, Ted Cruz said their religion encourages them to lie, and that the president wants to admit the same people that carried out the Paris attacks into this country.
There is a religious philosophy in Islamism that encourages them to lie to carry out jihad. We know that at least one of the terrorists who committed these horrible attacks in Paris came in with the refugees, and President Obama and Hillary Clinton and the Democrats are willing to allow those same refugees to come to our shores, and apparently they're willing to just roll the dice and take the risk that hundreds or, God forbid, thousands of Americans will be murdered by jihadists.
Thousands of Americans will be killed by jihadists in this country if we let the refugees come in. Anyway, frontrunner Donald Trump told Yahoo News that, quote, we're going to have to do certain things that were frankly unthinkable a year ago. And when asked about placing Muslims in a national database, he didn't rule it out. And then last night, Trump told an NBC News reporter that he'd absolutely enact such a program if he becomes president.
Should there be a database system that tracks the Muslims here in this country?
There should be a lot of systems beyond database. I mean, we should have a lot of systems. And today you can do it. But right now we have to have a border. We have to have strength. We have to have a wall. And we cannot let what's happening to this country happen.
But that's something your White House would like to implement.
Oh, I would certainly implement that. Absolutely.
For Muslims specifically, how do you actually get them registered into a database?
It would be just good management. What you have to do is good management procedures. And we can do that. That's nice.
I mean, do you go to mosques and sign these people up into the system?
Different places. You sign them up at different, but it's all about management. Our country has no management.
Well, today Trump tweeted this clarification. I didn't suggest a database. A reporter did. We must defeat Islamic terrorism and have surveillance, including a watch list to protect America. I'm joined now by MSNBC political analyst David Corn of Mother Jones, as well as Paul Singer, Washington correspondent with USA Today. So he obviously is sharpening up what was a kind of a sloppy statement. Right. Putting together a database, well, okay, I don't know how we keep track of religion in this country, but you certainly want to keep a lookout for people that give you reason for suspicion, which is where he's working his way back to sanity here.
But at the same time, he's also called for possibly closing down mosques, making Muslims carry identification papers.
Has he actually done that?
Yeah. So
wait a minute. Let's get back to this. Where did he say about identification papers?
First read of NBC News this morning. They outlined some of the statements he's made, and so it's all the same piece that Muslims are the other. Yeah. You know, this is what the argument that a lot of them try to make about Barack Obama, the secret Muslim, and they're feeding the fear or responding to the fear and paranoia of a good part of Americans, but particularly of the Republican primary electorate. Yeah. They want a visceral reaction, and they're equating terrorism with Muslims. You know, Ben Carson has done that a bunch of times, and you just saw Ted Cruz say Islamism, which I don't think is even a word. I guess basically leads to.
Well, here's the problem:
terrorism.
you have people in this country who are Islamic, who come from the former Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. You've got people here from Pakistan. Mm-hmm. Bangladesh, India, Indonesia. Islamic people come from all around the world. It's 1.75 billion people.
Right.
They're not, first of all, if you bring it into a subset of Arabs even, it's like 300 million Arabs. Okay, let's get down to Arabs. I mean, and then you get down to the small number of people who've given reason to be thought of as possible cell members. Like, let's face it, the French have been rounding up a lot of people who have a lot of guns.
Right. Well, I mean, part of the issue is Americans at the moment are smothered in fear. I mean, there is a palpable fear of another terror attack in America. I mean, there's the ABC News has the new survey out just today, in fact, that showed that something like 81% of Americans are expecting a terrorist attack in America.
But have you seen the numbers are worse? People believe that they will be hit in a terrorist attack.
Yeah,
those numbers that blow my mind. How people actually think they're going to win the reverse of the
lottery.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Some
but
lottery,
when you think of how rare it actually is, as you're making the point, right?
I was going to say the Irish sweepstakes. It's like one of those things, like the chance of one in a millions.
And we've had Muslims come into this country for years. We have, and it's so rare that it occurs here in the United States, and yet there is this fear, palpable fear, that it's going to happen. And of course, the candidates respond to that. And when they respond
this is
to
the
it,
weird
people
part.
respond to that.
We all travel like guys who work in TSA come from Islamic who are Islamic people. People that work in hotels are Islamic people. People who drive cars are.
My brother is a Muslim.
Yeah, I know.
My brother is a Muslim.
Okay, well,
we adopted a refugee
from Afghanistan. It's around us, and yet it's
part of our culture.
Sight, and it's portrayed as some furtive operation.
Well, that's what's happening. You have the Republicans running these lead candidates who are equating Muslim or Islamic with terrorism.
Right.
They're making this direct A to B point. And you got Jeb Bush and a few others pushing back. But that's the tone. Even John Kasich, who has seemed to be reasonable in the past, the other day called for a U.S. federal agency that would promote Judeo-Christian values around the world. So, like, they really want to make this an us versus
Well, I told that
Islam
the opening.
fight.
I said the opening, but I'm telling you, I said it during the break, I'll say it now loudly. If you believe the President of the United States, against every estimate of his life, every account of his life, everything about the Reverend Wright and all the rest, his family, everything about his history, if you still insist he's a foreigner,
right?
If you still insist he's from Africa, if you still insist he's a Muslim, then it's easy to say these guys coming in as refugees are dangerous.
And that he's doing it
and
that he's doing it on purpose. And about 30–40% of the Republican base believes that.
A new poll found that more than 4 in 5 Americans fear a large-scale terror attack in the near future. Over the weekend, President Obama urged Americans not to give in to fear, characterizing ISIS as a bunch of killers with good social media.
We do not succumb to fear. That's the primary power that these terrorists have over us. The most powerful tool we have to fight ISIL is to say that we're not afraid, to not elevate them, to somehow buy into their fantasy that they're doing something important. They're a bunch of killers.
Joining me now are Evan Coleman, an MSNBC terrorism analyst, and Timothy Murphy, a retired deputy director at the FBI. Timothy, let me start with you. It's understandable, I think, that the president would be urging Americans not to succumb to fear, but that seems a daunting task given those poll numbers, the amount of fear in the atmosphere, and also this State Department-issued travel warning. What do you make of that?
Well, look, I think that I agree with the president. We don't succumb to fear, right? But we also need to be more vigilant. We need to be on the same footing today as we were after the 9/11 attacks. This is serious. It's happening in countries all around the world. My contacts tell me in the law enforcement intelligence communities, they are on that footing similar to after 9/11 to make sure this doesn't happen in this country. People should still go about their daily business just like the government's telling you to do, because the risk, although the risk is very low of it happening, there still is a probability of something happening here, either direct or inspired from abroad or from some of our homegrown radicalized youth in this country.
Evan, Belgium's interior minister was asked how a key suspect like Salah Abdel Salam could remain at large given the unprecedented measures being taken by Belgian security officials. And he said he must have a lot of support on our soil. What did you read in that statement?
Yeah, not on his own. Obviously, there's a network of folks that either he's personally connected with, he's friends with, or perhaps they're sympathetic to what his mission are, and for some reason these people have decided to help hide him. He's obviously not doing this by himself. It's very difficult to imagine that someone that's the subject of a dragnet the size of what's searching for him right now would be able to slip through without assistance from others. And everything we know so far is that he's received assistance from others, and that's exactly how he managed to get to Belgium in the first place.
Timothy, I want to read a little bit from a New York Times op-ed last week, which one Belgian scholar wrote, and he explained in part that the Brussels neighborhood of Molenbeek, which has emerged as a hotbed of extremism, is in part such because of the administrative dysfunction of the Belgian government. And included in the deficiencies of the Belgian intelligence community is a lack of Arabic speakers at the Belgian State Security Service and a failure to recruit former radicals or even people from Muslim backgrounds. I guess I wonder, do you think that we're going to see Europeans become more systematic and comprehensive in their intelligence gathering?
Well, I think they have to, and we have to do the same thing here. What they're facing in Belgium is, not unlike what you're facing in other European countries, and not unlike what you're facing here. We have, the FBI says there's investigations in every single state in our country alone. We have 250 foreign fighters that have been documented traveling to Syria. So it's not unlike Europe. What we've seen in the past with these events is they've always occurred somewhere else, but they eventually have made it to our homeland. So we can talk about Belgium and their communities and not being integrated well enough into society, and that's where these individuals are radicalized. The same thing is happening around the world. And that's what we have to get our arms wrapped around. While we're doing that, we need to have better intelligence collection and sharing among all the intelligence agencies and law enforcement that are cooperating in this fight against ISIS.
Evan, the sheer multiplicity of this threat almost makes it seem impossible to conquer. I mean, you have Timothy talking about we have investigations around the world in all 50 states. The State Department travel warning includes Boko Haram, ISIS, the Islamic State. I mean, this is more than this is a multi-headed hydra.
Look, I think it's fair to say that there is a threat out there, and it's a threat that's existed not just today or last week, but for months. And unfortunately, it's only because of what happened in Paris that people paid attention. Nonetheless, it's extremely important to understand that more Americans die from very ordinary things like going out in the street than they do from terrorism. And that doesn't stop us from going out in the street. There was this crazy rumor floating around this weekend that ISIS was going to target the Phillips Arena in Atlanta and try to attack a world wrestling event. I mean, people have got to be reasonable, and they cannot let paranoia take hold of them. And I think the president is right. The reason why ISIS keeps releasing these videos, they've released 7 videos in the last 8 days. The reason that they keep doing this is because they want to create a drumbeat. They want to spread fear. They want to spread paranoia. It's one thing to take into account a serious threat and take reasonable precautions. It's another thing to go out and start denying refugees any right to come here, to start talking about not going shopping. These are not reasonable reactions to this kind of threat. There's a threat, but this is not the end of the United States, and it's important that we put this into proper context.
Timothy, I want to just hit one last point on the ISIS propaganda machine, which is perhaps more sophisticated than I think a lot of folks realize. The Washington Post interviewed former prisoners and former media savants for ISIS, and among the things that they single out, the Washington Post reports the description of ISIS propaganda machine resembles a medieval reality show. Camera crews fan out across the caliphate every day, their ubiquitous presence distorting the events they purportedly document. Battle scenes and public beheadings are so scripted and staged that fighters and executioners often perform multiple takes and read their lines from cue cards. Does this sound like something you've ever heard of?
No, and it's risen to a level, and we do not have a proportionate response to this. And over the last few years, as they've continued to radicalize and had people join ISIS over in the war zone in Syria and Iraq with 20,000 foreign fighters and radicalized individuals in this country, we have not as a whole of government or NGOs or communities really gotten together and helped counter this narrative that ISIS is being able to send across the internet from Syria, from Yemen, from North Africa, and individuals buying into this propaganda, and we have yet to respond to that as a government in a powerful way to counter that message, and that is part of the solution. There's not one solution for this. It's a multiple-pronged, whole-of-government, community involvement, and NGOs really responding to this to help turn